does a whiskey tell a story?
I mean, it absolutely does, just from an experiential standpoint. It's, there are the complexity, if you get into the nerdy side of the biochemistry on it, the complexity of esters that are there, basically all of the little ingredients that create flavors. Why do you get notes of vanilla if there's no vanilla mixed in it? Why are you getting notes of citrus if there's no orange mixed into it? Like these tasting notes are memories, and they're memories that are triggered by a set of chemistry that evolves from the creation of that spirit, whiskey or otherwise. And so absolutely, that sensory perception is a story unto itself. Also gets passed through the individual memories of the people drinking it. So two people can sit down in front of the same dram, have a drink, and get told a completely different story, which is really freaking cool.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Writers Drinking Whiskey, your Storytellers and Storymakers edition, a night at the Obscure. I am your host, William R. Hincy, and as every good writer knows, every good story starts with a stiff drink. And to that end, I am really honored today to have a double shot of guest, Théron Regnier Hope Ewing. I think I nailed both names, too. I want to point that out. I got it right. I nailed it.
Well done.
Very good. Guys, welcome to our virtual bar here.
Hey, happy to be here.
And what a bar it is.
Yes, I know. It's not as nice as yours, but it's my humble home, and you're at the Obscure, right? It looks like it from the background. Yeah, very good. Okay, it was dark when my wife and I were there, but I could sense it. So, awesome. So let me give you guys the kind of the 10-cent bio here, and if there's anything you'd like to add, feel free to chip in. So Théron, you're the owner, master distiller of the Obscure. Correct. And then so that people know kind of heading into this, and if there's a marketing flair you like, feel free to jump in here. I would call it a speakeasy like no other, right? Like it's with a storytelling bent to it, which was really fun. My wife and I went for my birthday. That's why we happened to be there. And she's gotten used to me now. Like anytime we go somewhere, we were at a Bigfoot convention at one point, and there was a guy, Dr. Jeff Meldrum is the guy's name. I went and talked to him and stuff, and I'm like, you got to come on my show and talk Bigfoot for like 3 hours. And, we set it up and we talked Bigfoot for 3 hours. But that's Théron. Anything else you want to add to that, Théron? Anything I might have missed?
No, I mean, not really. That's sort of the title of it here. But we've been kicking up dust in the Arts District really as a pandemic project since 2020. So, we've got both the distillery and of course, the bar space. People do like to call it a speakeasy, but I always like to caution it's not one of those that you can just kind of stroll into if you know the password. We're sort of reservations based, and it's kind of a whole program. It's a prefix menu of spirits and cocktails, and the bar program is just as important as the distilling program. And it's really the relationship between both and what we come up with together. So we're excited as a double shot to be here with you.
Good, awesome. And then Hope is keeping with the writer theme of the show here. So you're the author of Movers and Shakers, Women Making Waves with Spirit, Beer, and Wine. You've also published. And there it is on the screen. You've also published a number of fiction pieces, I noticed on your website as well. And then you are the director of beverages, the master of beverages, the czar of beverages for the Obscure.
Well, my LinkedIn title is Potions Master, actually. So
oh, very good.
Forgot that one.
Yeah, I'll get better at it one day. Awesome. So my favorite question of the show, what are we drinking?
So, whiskey to start, but I have I have assembled the fixings of a drink that is. So one of the things that we present during our season 2 tasting is the Rites of Fall Chestnut Rye, which is one of the bottles to your left, over your left shoulder there, so that is a super interesting rye that we can kind of get into now or later. Kind of.
Go ahead, go for it now.
Okay. So it's a rye whiskey matured completely on American chestnut, which, if anybody is familiar with the books, with in fiction and nonfiction with the Overstory is, I think, the novel that people most often bring up as being how they learned about the American chestnut. Or just in general, I know it's been in the news quite a bit lately, but it is a functionally extinct tree.
Oh, wow. Good.
That I don't know if Théron, do you want to tell him a little bit about the chestnut story, and then we can.
Certainly.
Actually, I have an idea. Oh. Sorry. So I'm not going to be one of those boring Instagram type videos where you just watch someone make a drink. Why don't you tell the story and I will make the drink as you go
simultaneously? Okay, I love it.
Very good.
A lot of it starts with just understanding a little bit of this sort of national history of this once great but now functionally extinct tree. The American chestnut tree was sort of the redwood of the East Coast. Once upon a time, at least up until a blight came over from Japan, and over the course of about a decade, managed to nearly wipe out the entire population. And we say nearly because, and functionally extinct because the roots actually survived. So the fungus attacked these trunks, and they were huge. They were actually, there's a drawing right behind me.
Oh, sure.
You can't see it, but there's a tiny little person about that big. That's how big the trees used to be. So they were used to build everything: barns, benches, barrels, back in the day. So it was common for spirits to be matured, yes, on American oak, but also there was the option of American chestnut pre-blight. But once the blight happened, of course, that really took out all the trees, but at the trunk. But the roots survived, and they sort of go through this process of every year trying again and again. These little sprouts come up oil and some sprouts try to see if life can find a way, and that is extremely rare. Occasionally one will make it to adulthood over the course of a couple of decades, but ultimately an organization, a nonprofit organization called the American Chestnut Foundation took the mantle of the restoration and revitalization of this species using hybridization and a number of other techniques, not only to draw attention to what happened, over 100 years ago, but also dig up the curiosity and interest in perhaps bringing this once great king of the forest back. And it's kind of an interesting, it's a comeback story. Like, who doesn't love a comeback?
Yeah, sure.
And in a lot of ways, this is very much it's an ongoing fight. The research is still being done. There isn't really a solution yet. But one of the things as a distiller I was tickled by was the idea that spirits used to be matured on something other than American oak. And I think everybody who's a spirits nerd has just sort of assumed that of course American whiskeys, Scotch whiskeys, Irish whiskeys, they're all sort of just by default over 90% made on American oak, and nobody really questions that because it's the way things are. But knowing that there was sort of an alternate timeline where, if that blight hadn't happened, would that be the way things are? And that question and that curiosity really drove the interest in creating a spirit that was matured on this functionally extinct tree. And so it's the project and the curiosity has wonderfully led to a partnership with the American Chestnut Foundation, where very carefully, they don't have a lot of this wood available, but they do have some, and they send that to us, and we are able to create the spirit over your shoulder with it. But what's remarkable is that it brings a new voice to the conversation because it's familiar, but at the same time different. It has, whereas American oak is noted for its vanilla and sort of baking spice quality, this brings a sort of stone fruit and citrus quality to it. But it still tastes like a recognizable whiskey. So it's almost this really interesting retcon, of
sure.
And it brings this flavor note sort of back with it in a way that allows us to tell a very interesting story, and have something to taste along with that story. So that's been the genesis of the spirit itself. But as far as what it does in a cocktail, well, that's where Hope gets involved.
We will say that because our the The Rites of Fall is sort of the top shelf version. It's super limited. We don't make a lot of them, so it is a bit more. It is on the higher end side. So I like to make the cocktail representing this story and this process with our other rye, with the
over your right shoulder.
Let's hold them up for everyone here, because I made sure, and actually I put them over each shoulder too, so it'd be like the two angels. Or I guess you don't get two angels, you get one angel and one devil. But here we are for anyone watching.
Yes, and then and our label art, by the way, is sorry, I'm being very bad at broadcasting right now. Our label art, by the way, is courtesy of Théron's co-founder. I do it this way.
Yep.
Sorry,
Laura Hines. Yeah, so all the much like the Obscure itself, the space itself is very much filled with art, as exemplified by what's on the wall behind us here. This entire project was not just a pandemic project, but really a sanctuary for a group of artists, creatives, builders, sculptors, musicians, bartenders, distiller, looking for something other than Netflix to do during the pandemic, and create and give ourselves a creative outlet that also gave us an investment and a hope in the idea that things might someday return to normal. And it sort of let us put some effort into a future that wasn't necessarily guaranteed. And that, I think, was therapeutic. And fortunately, the vaccines did roll out. Fortunately, things have returned to some semblance of normal. And we've never really lost sight of the fact that when we host our tastings with folks, that it is still actually a pleasure and a privilege to be able to stand in the same room as another group of people and have a drink together. And that is just one of those takeaways from that whole experience that I know a lot of people share. And for as much as that entire ordeal tore so many of us apart, it's such a privilege to be able to, bring people back together again. And so we
absolutely.
We respect it and we honor it.
Yes.
That's what it's lovely. I always say that actually when I start the show. I always like to say that I'm honored, and I don't mean it like quaintly or perfunctory. Like I really mean it. Like it's an honor to have people on and get to spend some time with them and everything. So you feel that when you go in, like my wife Claire and I, when we had gone, and you really felt like welcome there. Like it's something special, and there's a lot you can clearly see that you guys put into it. So thank you for that. And you were starting to talk, Hope, and I'm a horrible host because I like to talk too much, so I step on people all the time. But just trample over me next time.
Okay, just hold those on through. No, I was just going to say that without further ado. So the drink
very good.
I sent for you that I shared with you ahead of time. So I make a drink to sort of pair with the chestnut whiskey in our tastings. We call it Darling 58, which is one of it's very hotly debated in the chestnut community. If anybody's interested in dendrology drama, this is a big one. And I am.
I mean, who isn't? I'm
not even saying that dismissively. I'm always just, what's going to happen next? So the Darling 58 was a transgenic chestnut revival project that was started at the Environmental Science and Forestry School at Syracuse University. Go Orangemen. And it was sort of very debated. There are multiple camps and schools of thought about chestnut revival, and if they should be doing genetic engineering, they should be doing just crossbreeding, or there's a lot of information out there about it. It's fascinating. But Darling,
a lot of opinions.
I'm sure, yeah.
So, but the Darling 58, I thought was a very interesting case. And I named the drink after it. And then but as I said, that one, it's a little ingredient heavy. It's a little bartendery. It's got like things that maybe not everybody has around the house. So I decided to pare it down and call the more simplified version is the Darling 54, which was another part of the saga. So look it up. The one that we're drinking today is the base is the Seven Spheres rye and about 2 ounces. It's sort of a very old-fashioned / Black Manhattan variation. There's only 6 cocktails in the world. Everything else is a variation on one of them. So that is also a hotly debated point. I know the bartender is going to come at me for that, but so we're starting with the rye, making this sort of a whiskey old-fashioned Manhattan variation. I put a spoonful of I'm using Nocino, which is a black walnut liqueur from Italy, but you can also use amaretto. That might be a little easier to find. I like the Laceroni amaretto, but whatever you got around, it's going to be sweet, little bunny, going to be great. And then for the stone fruit note, I am using an apricot liqueur. This is the Rothman Winter apricot, but as long as it's it's a light sort of stone fruity, and swap it out if you want. You can use. I find that the apricot and rye is a classic. There is a classic old-fashioned variation called a Fairbanks, which is basically I think it's a rye. Yeah, it's a rye old-fashioned with the sugar swapped out for apricot liqueur. Chef's kiss. Order it at a bar; they'll think you're very fancy. And then lastly, the bitters of your choice, really. I like to use, specifically, this one is called Bitter Cube. It's called cherry bark and vanilla bitters, but Angostura and or orange bitters work perfectly well, especially in combination. And then you stir, and you put a little orange zest on it, and there you go. You want to try it?
Very good, yes. And I have my pre-made, probably not as good one, but
In a beaker.
In a beaker, yeah, or a beaker. That was good though. When you sent it, because I trusted you from having been there and having had trades you guys are prepared anyways. But I was like, I really love old fashions of things. But sometimes when people try to put like the twist on them, and it's like and it gets fruity, I don't like too sweet. So it's what happens is it gets too sweet. I'm not real into it. So I saw it. I'm like, I trust her. I went and found which one did I end up finding here? Oh, the Driller apricot. I think it was one you had. I think you had recommended on there, or that was the only one our Total Wine and More had. But yeah, so it's really good. It's not too sweet and at all. So thank you for that. So awesome. So then maybe we can transition here as we sip on our delicious drinks to the art of making whiskey. So I wonder then, Théron, if you could maybe just start us on the journey, like what led to, how did you get into distilling and just take us from there.
Yeah, it's I always chalk it up to feature creep. It's it's one of those things that it started with just kind of enjoying early aughts cocktail culture as it kind of came to LA. Very much barfly, the sort of Tuesday, Wednesday barfly. Not so much the Friday, Saturday night barfly.
Sure.
You could kind of just you pull up a stool and hang out. And so, but very much enjoyed all the thematics too, that sort of early speakeasy a la Prohibition style speakeasy, kind of watching that come to the surface and evolve and complete with the suspenders and bow ties and Edison bulbs. But I as a fan of all things immersion, I was into it. I was into the playfulness of it and the escapism of it. Also, having a love of tiki culture and things like that too. It was just kind of one other version, another variant on the escapism and thematics that comes with a drinking experience. It's a bar. It's supposed to be fun.
Right.
Hope says that's a direct quote from Hope Ewing. Olin and I use frequently, but it's true, right? It's supposed to be fun. But my interest developed through the lens of cocktails. My interest in spirits. I had, being a native Angelino, I had also spent quite a bit of time falling in love with tequilas, but whiskeys were right there along with it. And I found myself sort of getting really interested in the cocktails, yes, but also the role that different spirits played in the cocktails. How you could take the same recipe and swap out your spirit base and get a completely different expression. And that sort of led to an obvious path of going to the store and shopping for different bottles and coming to the conclusion that it was weird that there were 4 aisles of wine and 1 aisle of spirits. And why is that? It seems like, you can make wine from grapes, but you can make spirits from just about anything. Like, it should be the other way around. So the curiosity just sort of unfolded, and I started my nerddom really in so, in all the social media a long time ago, I sort of locked down the whiskeyist as my like social profile. Even though I make a whole bunch of different things these days, that was sort of my gateway. And, again, feature creep. It's like I got interested in the cocktails, and then I got interested in the spirits, and then I got deeply interested in one particular spirit. And so that led to experimentation. Certainly, home distillation still not legal. I definitely never did that at all.
Right. We'll have a disclaimer on the screen purposely, no one's admitting or, to any crimes or misdemeanors here today.
Yeah, but
also not necessarily recommended because we don't want anyone to blow up their kitchen. So
yeah,
proceed with caution for a reason.
Yeah, do not try this at all. Try it outside.
The garage is if you have a shed. That's the best place to actually.
I mean, the dangers of the vapors. There's a reason they have the sombrero of death, which is that sort of shape of the way vapors will collect around a still if it's not condensing properly, and that is definitely a problem. But it's a whole lot less of a problem if you're doing it outside where there's a light breeze. So pro tip, wink, wink. But no. But yeah, it's feature creep, and every level that I got interested in, I found myself with more questions than answers. And at some point it sort of took over. I had that inflection point in my life where I was like, am I interested enough in this to literally start from zero again? I had a suit and tie desk job, a 9-to-5 that was predictable with lots of free time to go hang out at bars afterwards. And swapping that out to be basically a novice and an amateur all over again. It was a decision, but I felt like it was one that was much more closely aligned with the things that I was truly interested in. Also, as a creative outlet, there's not a lot of creativity in most suit and tie jobs, and that was certainly true in my case. And so I felt like, this was an opportunity to tap into the playfulness of possibility with that. And so I did, and it's been a journey that's stretched everywhere from Oregon to South Carolina and back again here in LA. But it is one that never ceases to humble because there's just more than anybody could ever know. But it also never ceases to provide opportunities to learn and opportunities to grow. And that is, specifically with spirit making, I found that it is a privilege as well to get to work with bartenders, because again, my passion for this really develops through the lens of cocktails. And to sort of bring it back to a cocktail, bring it back. It's like when I make stuff, the first thing I do is bring it back to the bar and say, let's go mix with it. How does this showing up? What is it telling us? What's lacking? What's overpronounced? I want to know that entire story, not just, sipping on it neat in the context of a distillery. Some people like to drink their spirits neat. Other people like to drink it in a cocktail. And who am I to judge or say which way is better? How about we just make stuff that works in every way possible?
Right, sure. Some of us like it both ways. I always have for the show, because I'll have one cocktail, and usually I have these wooden cups. I'm a uber nerd, so we also do Ren Fair every year, and I come back with some kind of craft kind of things. And they didn't have them there, but my wife got one of the ale kind of mugs that was wooden. Man, if you had some like whiskey glasses, I'd be on it. He's like, we're making them right now. Email me and I'll send them over. So I did, and I have a couple of these now. So that was interesting that you said that, because it was one of the questions I had for the both of you. Really, is that is there like a story to whiskey, right? Like I'll hear like wine people specifically, right? Like, and I don't know. I'm just some guy, right, that likes whiskey and things. So don't take any of these if there's no thought or research. Well, there's thought, but there's no research, done behind these things. But like wine, Yeah, exactly. They don't wine people that would be like, oh, the grapes that year and this and that is, and maybe not as literal as that, but does a whiskey tell a story? Like, so when you distill one, breaking it down to maybe it's cocktails, neat, whatever have you. Does a whiskey tell a story?
I mean, it absolutely does, just from an experiential standpoint. There are the complexity. If you get into the nerdy side of the biochemistry on it, the complexity of esters that are there, basically all of the little ingredients that create flavors. Why do you get notes of vanilla if there's no vanilla mixed in it? Why are you getting notes of citrus if there's no orange mixed into it? Like these tasting notes are memories, and they're memories that are triggered by a set of chemistry that evolves from the creation of that spirit, whiskey or otherwise. And so absolutely, that sensory perception is a story unto itself. Also gets passed through the individual memories of the people drinking it. So two people can sit down in front of the same dram, have a drink, and get told a completely different story, which is really freaking cool.
Yeah.
It's a point of entertainment, really, when you do that with among people that you enjoy spending time with, because then you get to talk about it, right? What memories does that bring to the surface? Why is that a memory? Is that something worth sharing? And so 100%. Like, I think there's the subjective nature of spirits, whiskey, of course, included, really lends itself to a very personal story. That said, you can also, if you take it out of the glass for a moment and you talk about how that thing came to be, you've got a story there, right? The process, that's where you get into things like what ingredients were made with, where did the water come from, what type of wood was used, American chestnut.
Yeah, sure.
You pick one piece of that process and you zoom all the way in, and you can find questions that have their own answers, and those answers are their own stories, which is, I think, again, sort of why I love the story of the American chestnut, because as we tell it with the tasting, it's taking people who might think whiskey and just like, okay, that's a thing. That's one thing, right?
Right.
And it's like, no. You have to parse out like what grains were used, what fermentation, what yeast was used, what kind of still was used, what temperature, what season was it? What was the air pressure out?
Sure.
Distillation. I mean, there's when you start to deconstruct how many questions need to be answered to get from start to finish in a glass, and then you pick one of those questions, i.e., what wood was used to mature this spirit, and then you dive all the way into the origin story of that particular piece of the equation. Then when you zoom back out again, the understanding of the complexity fundamentally shifts, I think, a lot of people's perspective on what makes a drinking experience. And it's not just, sure, it's about having a good time and you will feel the effects of a good time, but it's also, hey, there's a lot that goes into this, and it's an exercise in curiosity. And as much as the industry loves tradition, and those traditions exist for a reason, and those reasons are stories unto themselves, when you change, when you transform any one of those components, you basically create a new story. And that's fascinating, right? So you can look backwards and you can look forwards. It's not an industry that has to be kept in a box.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and that's why I was excited to expand the show out beyond just always kind of, writers. Besides the fact that writers come on, I talk 90% of anything except for writing, But what I do really enjoy talking is storytelling. So it's when you kind of get into that, you can see all that same stuff you said, you could apply to writing a book, right? Two people could read that story, have different, impressions of it. It's gonna, they're gonna have their own experience they bring to it. They have their own unique experience with that book, with that movie, with that poem, whatever it might be, the different forms of storytelling. So that was brilliant. Thank you for expanding about that. I wonder if we move to the cocktail making part of it, because one of the things I find like utterly like baffling, right, is how like people and like, because I see a story, I see ingredients, right, kind of bang them together. I don't know how like you do that with like taking like whiskeys and tastes. I would just be throwing stuff together. I'd be throwing crap at the wall all day and be like, oh, this one worked. And I'd forget what ingredients were there. And I'd be like, oh, well, I'm going to drink this glass. And that's the end of the story here. But how do you go about, kind of coming? You said there were 6 basic cocktails before. I don't know if that plays into it, but how do you go about it?
Pretty much as you just described. Kind of just pour a bunch of things into a shaker until something tastes good, and then you try to remember what it was. When you've done that, when you get
write it down.
So I can apply. I can apply to the Obscure now. I can throw things in a glass.
Absolutely. Well, so I explain it in a number of ways when I am trying to explain this to my bar crew, or my baby bartenders, as we say, who are adults in their 20s and 30s, but they're baby bartenders. And speaking of stories and origin stories, the thing I always start with is there's this thing called yeast. Yeast are fungi who are magic aliens, and they want us to be happy. So we have sugar and we have yeast, and then we have the miracle of life, or ethanol and alcohol. But in the and from there we go through the history of every spirit we can talk about. And if you think the whiskey story is interesting, you should talk to some mezcal people, or
Sure.
talk to or we could talk about rum, because that's just a psychedelic fever dream.
Sure.
But I think so. As a side note, one of the things that drew me into cocktail bartending specifically, because I started out in the bar industry working in neighborhood pubs and sports bars and dive bars. Like you do, you're trying to, it is an easy way to make money and to socialize, especially if you're not great at socializing on the other side of the bar. You can do it with this nice, neat barrier in between, and just be able to run off and polish glassware whenever you get nervous or get tired of a conversation. There's a lot of, I will just say there's a lot of neurodiversity in the bar industry.
Sure.
But so effectively, the story of how you bring a cocktail together, and yes, some people say there are only, I do have a long-term, an experienced bartender that I work with who claims there are only 3 cocktails, and we have differences of opinion. But there are, after you make enough of all of the things, all of the recipes that you've been given, you go through that Mr. Boston's book, or you go through, your cocktail codex. And when you make enough of the recipes over and over again, you start to notice, oh, these measurements are always the same. This is how much citrus has to go with this much sweetener. Like, these are all of the elements that need to balance each other out. And it becomes like music theory, I think, is my favorite analogy, because you kind of just learn what each element is that goes into all these drinks and how they harmonize with each other. You're building a chord. So, and in that way you can take something that would be sugar or maraschino, and you can swap it out with something else that is sweet, or, you can change out your bitter element. That's why, things like a Negroni and a Boulevardier and, a Kingston Negroni, all of these drinks work equally well when you change out one ingredient, because the balancing principle is the same. You've kept your balance of sweet and sour, or your balance of bitter and sweet, or strong and weak. And, it becomes this sort of very beautiful, not to be dramatic, but for me, it is very,
it's okay.
Not to be dramatic, but it's a young epiphany. I don't know.
It's a show with writers on it. The show gets very dramatic, so you don't have to pretend. We're all dramatic here. So amongst friends, storytellers get dramatic, generally speaking.
We would not have jobs if we didn't. So, it is, for me, it's this very like profound, like multi-sensory, musical thing. And then at the end of the day, you hand someone a drink and they like it or they don't like it. And then you get a little buzz and everyone has fun because it's a bar.
Right, right. Very good. Words to live by. Words to live by. That's what I always say about the show. It's a labor of fun. Sometimes people will be stressing. I'm like, it's a labor of fun. Like, don't worry about it. They're going to come on. As long as we have fun, it's golden. I have no worries, from there. Awesome. So thanks for that. So I wonder then maybe we can transition. Actually, I did have to ask about this. I think I might know the answer a little bit from one of your statements earlier, Théron, but how should I be drinking my whiskey when I want to, so not generally, right? I can get a cocktail and things. That all makes sense. But if I want to taste a whiskey, is there some magic way I should be doing it? Or should I just be the 240-pound Irishman that I am and guzzle it down like I currently do?
Well, this guy drinks it from the bottle, but...
Sure. I am a ginger. It comes with the genetics. But no, a lot of people ask that question. Actually, it's one of the things I really enjoy about hosting tastings here is a lot of folks that come through. They're starting from scratch, which is great. It's because that is the point at which there's a lot of curiosity. And like we were talking about earlier, if anything, it's about teaching people how many questions there are to ask. But a frequent one, mostly usually rooted in not wanting to look bad, is the question of how am I supposed to do this? And when people ask me how am I supposed to drink whiskey, I say frequently and in good company, because those are
Amen.
The most important factors. But is there a process that I would say there are ways of drinking it depending on what you're into? Certainly, if it's hot out and drinking it over ice. Yeah. Are you going to remove some of your sensory perception of those flavors because the temperature drops? Yes. But it's hot out and you're here to enjoy a whiskey. So throw an ice cube. Nobody cares. Are you, is it at a proof where you want to put it in a Glencairn glass? You need that sort of tulip shape because you're really trying to pick apart the volatility of the compounds coming off the glass. Sure, if you're really trying to pick apart the story chapter by chapter, that is one way to do it. And if that's your purpose, then that is the right way to drink a whiskey. And personally, this is not speaking for the industry. This is not speaking for anybody else but my own personal preference. When I am analyzing spirits, I have personally found that 74 degrees, give or take a degree, is kind of the sweet spot, because any warmer than that and you actually start to pick up a bit of extra sweetness from spirits, and any colder than that, you start to lose perception of different flavor components. And so as I'm doing, and a lot of making anything is quality control. It's consistency. So I'm saying hey, am I able to do the same thing over and over again? And in order to do that, you have to analyze it the same way. So it kind of forces you to pick something and stick to it. But in my experience, room temperature right around 74 degrees is kind of a sweet spot for analyzing spirits and enjoying them. But yeah, I will not discriminate on the too much on the how. That's from a judgmental standpoint.
It was interesting you said that when you said break it down chapter by chapter, because I had I'm a horrible student. I was going, and this drives my wife nuts. So I'm glad she walked out of the kitchen, which is on the other side of me here. I walked away from school with 3 classes left to get my bachelor's because I was bored and done with it, In fact, not to digress too much, but I felt like it was making me a worse writer. I was publishing short stories, doing fairly well for a young guy. I was a single dad and doing fairly well for a young guy that's working full time and writing on the side. And then I get deeper and deeper into school, and suddenly I didn't even like the things I wrote and things. I think you get into that bubble of it, and for me, that just didn't work. Some people, maybe it's great, but I had a professor and his words always stuck with me. And even though he would do it every single class, it was you kill to dissect. So you have to kill the thing so you can dissect it and get to its parts. And you might understand the frog at some elemental level after you dissect it, but do you understand the frog as the same way as by experience it and things? So I think there's 2 different ways, and they're probably equally valuable. I mean, dissecting people led to lots of modern science and medicine and increase in our lifespan. So that's good. and important. But I think when you said that, it kind of made sense for why I just kind of like to drink it and not, I have the fancy glasses we got in Scotland at one point and things. And I'll do it, but I just never feel right about it. And I've never kind of understood why. And I think you articulated that. It's like, oh, I think it goes back. I'm like, I feel like I'm killing this thing. Like, no, I just want to drink it and see how I feel about it. Like, watch the hawk fly and get a sense for how I feel about it, not see it, change in the zoo. So.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing about doing tastings too. That it's been my observation over the years is there are the type of people who are interested in the how and interested in the dissection, and there's others who just want to understand the grog. Like, and it's
yeah.
And so it's far be it for me to say which is better. It's really a personal journey, but certainly when it comes down to your story around getting to the end of college is kind of. I share a similar story. Fun fact: my college degree was in screenwriting, so I never actually never did anything with it. But it's one of those things that I got to the end of that story, the end of my last semester.
Okay.
And, I dipped out. Now it took a year. And I went back and I finished it, but I got to that same point. I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm not
yeah, I think it does that a lot. I think it's hard to teach the arts in an academic setting. I think screenwriting, poetry, all of their arts, and it's really hard to kind of. And I don't want to digress. Because I know we've already been at it here for 51 minutes. So, but I think sometimes when you try to do that, right, where it's like, oh, you need to have 16 classes and this is the exact pace and here's the essays you write. It's really hard to be an artist in the midst of all of that. So,
well, I'm on the last note of that as an MFA graduate, and I know also the debate and drama around that is hotly debated as chestnut drama, but I share that ambivalence because I think I had a similar experience with a lot of people after you went, after you got your writing degree that was supposed to bring you into new heights of writing, and you just couldn't. I don't think I touched a keyboard for 2 or 3 years after that until I started writing about alcohol, basically. So
sure. Yeah, you just have to break you out of the doldrums of it. So I get it, and I know, and I've had academics, on the show, and I had my old professor, one of my old professors that I really adored on the show, and I've had other MFA people on. Some people it works out okay with, but it's not for everyone. I don't think it's should be chosen wisely. You're not going to be the next Hemingway getting that MFA, or insert name here, because I know some people are like, oh, Hemingway, it's really the next Hemingway. But anywho, yeah. So maybe then we can move on here. I did want to hit pretty hard and heavy here the Obscure. So I know we talked about how it came to be kind of to start the show. What I was really hoping for, because it seems like a place with a lot of stories, right? Like it's just primed for story making. So I wonder if you guys can. I learned this from my kids. If you could spill the tea, like, what are the what are just like maybe both can pick a story or something, but what are kind of the stories that you think of, kind of the background, just kind of everyday stories of the Obscure?
Speaking of tea, I'm going to use that as a launch point. So one of the accidentally wonderful things that has emerged from recently as a favorite here is we make a tea. It is literally called Thieves' Tea. It is made from the spent botanicals that are used to make the gin.
Oh, awesome.
And originally, it was concepted as nothing more than a way of dealing with the fact that we had absolutely no HVAC here. We had no air conditioner, no heater. And so, in the setting, like this property, it's not new. It's been around for a while. So, also a good portion of it that is under sort of like a canopy or a tent but it's technically outdoor space. So there's not much in the way of insulation. And so in the summer, it's hot. This past weekend was a doozy. And in the winter, it's cold. And, you know, it was very quick. It was the first winter we had here where we were doing tasting. It was just sort of that realization of like, oh, shoot, like this is not actually an enjoyable drinking environment. Like people are going to be a little too cold. And so, you know, first thing was what sort of hot thing can we make for people when they arrive so that they're not cold? And I was like, you know, let's just make some tea. Here, like I've got, and every time I distill the gin, of course, you open the lid on the still, all the steam comes out with the botanicals, and it very much smells like, it smells like a hot tea. And I was like, always thinking, I'm like, oh, that smells good. It's like you get to the end of a gin run, you're like, oh, that's amazing. It's just it's like, oh, hey, we need something hot to serve people that are freezing their butts off. And I've got a bunch of spent botanicals. Let's just go make some tea with that real quick. We did. People absolutely loved it. It was really, really popular to the point where everybody was like, hey, can I buy the tea? And then, of course, summer came and we went the other direction. So we made an iced tea version of it. Same thing, right? So we now have hot tea for cold days and iced tea for hot days. But it's become such a staple that even people who have come back to us multiple times, it's like they'll just run in and they'll be like, "Where's the tea at?"
So, right.
Is the Cheddar Bay biscuit equivalent of the Obscure? Like you thought you came for the lobster at Red Lobster, but really, what everybody wants to for biscuits.
Yeah,
it is the thieves' tea equivalent.
But I use that as a parable of sort of the broader, I think, you know, tea of a lot of this, which is just serendipity. There's a lot of things that we sort of stumbled into out of blind necessity. They weren't necessarily planned. I mean, the biggest example of that is the chestnut whiskey. It is absolute. There was nothing about that I could have predicted. And mostly because the story of how it came to be is very much this was a project that I had started way back in like 2016 and abandoned given the lack of chestnut. It is a functionally extinct tree. And was telling Hope that story when she told me.
I said, well, how much wood do you want? Théron had been doing his early experiments by hacking apart antique furniture and planing off the varnish to get enough wood to see how it would play with the whiskey. And there's antique nightstands are a finite resource, even more finite than American chestnuts. And I happened to, you know what? And the actual tea is that I had heard that story being in the spirits community. I had heard this story years ago that some crazy people were trying to do this chestnut whiskey. And I said, that's super interesting because my dad has been a member of the American Chestnut Foundation for the past 30 years and has been planting backcross seedlings in our backyard and has about 37 or 40 of them.
Oh, wow. That was amazing. That is funny. It is funny, the serendipity of things. It's just, you can try to predict it. I think this is the problem with central planning generally. I'm gonna plan something, and then like everything is just chaos, right? Just underneath it, and this person does that thing, that person does that thing, and but yeah, go on. Were you saying anything else?
Oh no, well, I can say I supervise a lot of bartenders. Everything is chaos. Yeah, I love that. We're all crazy. But yeah, so I heard this story and I had this sort of bookmarked in my back pocket, and then I meet up with Théron through common business acquaintances. I was making canned cocktails at the time. I had no intention of ever going back on premise or rooming a bar or a restaurant ever again. And he, we were talking business, and he told me the story about how he had been trying for the better part of 8 years to make a chestnut whiskey. And I said, well, today is perhaps your lucky day. So the next time I went home for a holiday, I came back I cleared out all of my checked luggage and just threw a bunch of fallen branch wood into it. and we were able to pull off a lot of the proof of concept of the random branches that my dad decided he was never actually going to turn into a walking stick.
Very good. Awesome. Thank you for that. That was see, the show always just works out. I always tell people, like, it just works out. Like, there are things I plan, things like, oh, they didn't. No. I just, things work out how they work out. So before we move on here, I wonder though, what is next here for the Obscure? Do you guys have anything, any big plans, or what are the next steps?
It wouldn't be the Obscure if there weren't plans. Schemes, evil schemes stuff. But it's we kind of don't sit still, and it's even where we are today. I don't think any of us could have envisioned just a few years ago, because obviously we were navigating the pandemic.
Sure.
And nobody really knew what the future was going to look like anyway. So a lot of this has been a whole lot more like it's been a whole lot more like jazz. We're just kind of playing with clubs. And certainly we are 2 seasons in right now. We have a season 1 tasting, a season 2 tasting. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't deep in the product development for a season 3 tasting that is on the horizon. So that's kind of that's the easiest way to encapsulate what is next. But there's a lot of other things that have really bubbled to the surface for us. We have, it became apparent very quickly that a lot of people really liked the space and kind of the permission that came with being in a place where you could create without judgment. You could ask questions without judgment. The sort of, the permission that came with being here in a playful escapist world really was like people wanted to come back, but not necessarily in the format of a structured tasting. And so we had this idea for a membership, which, we're over 1,000 members now. It's turned into a whole social tool, where we do everything from food science labs to cocktail classes to D&D nights to tiki takeovers. It's literally just it's a bunch of nerds getting together along different fandoms and topics, and just sort of having time to hang out and connect with each other and play. And that, I'm not sure you could have seen that one coming, but here we are. And it's every Tuesday and Wednesday we've got pretty much a full house. That's off program, right? It's not part of our structured tasting, and so that's certainly presented itself as being kind of a fun plot twist. And then, it's another thing too, where people people who come here, we increasingly get, I think as word gets out, more tourist types that will come through. And it's always the sentiment of oh, this would work so well in another city, insert city here, wherever it is they came from. And, it is sort of the playfulness of, hey, we lean into pretty heavily the terroir of LA, right? Mm-hmm. And that is storytelling. A lot of distilleries will lean into their local water source, their local crops, as being the vehicle for the story they tell and the spirits they make. And I think you can say a lot of things about LA, but it is absolutely a storyteller's town. And I think we've put ourselves in a really fun position where we can tell stories from anywhere. Any place, any time, it all kind of works here. We sit outside of that, and because of that, people are kind of well, I want to hear what that would be like, in a different place, in a different time.
Sure.
So it's not impossible to imagine a future where we get to do that, where we get to kind of spread a little bit out further. But for right now, what's next? Season 3. And that's the closest target. So we're working on it.
No, very good. That what I like about that is the speaking of serendipity is that we're on season 3 coming up. I've actually started filming shows for season 3. In fact, actually, I think you guys we'll talk after the show when you would like to kind of air, but you guys may technically be season 3. So Writers Drinking Whiskey is also moving to season 3. So I don't have a cool building or a member club. It's just bunch of people that like reading and drinking, but
hey, we subscribe.
Very good. Thank you for that. I think it's time then to transition to some shots. You don't have to do shots, but I will judge you, for it. And I saw you had the bottle there. You go,
not much. We've been using it.
Yeah, very good, very good. So, rapid fire questions, and I'm thinking since there's two of you, let's just go Hope to Théron. So, Hope you answer these first, and then you follow. So, you guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, flavored whiskey, work of the devil or worthy of capital punishment?
Yes. Sure, work of the devil, but sometimes you need a little devil in you.
Isn't that just a proto cocktail?
Kind of.
Yeah. Is it? I don't know. I like to do questions like that to where there's like just the only option that agrees with me. And I feel that way about cinnamon and peanut butter whiskeys. I can't, I like cocktails. I can't do it. That's everyone can drink how you want unless you're trying to give me Fireball, and then I'm going to judge you. Fireball people, I'm sorry. But
I'm not thinking either, but so it's a big wide world. I always say there's enough. There's plenty of bows in the world. You don't have to drink it all now, and you don't have to drink what's in front of you. You can always find something better.
Yeah. Amen. What is the biggest risk you've ever taken? Whoever wants to go first. It's both of you are answering. So
I was wondering if that No, I mean, honestly, this whole enterprise is, it's we opened a distillery in the middle of a pandemic. I was at the ABC office filing for our permits, and they were all behind, plexiglass, wearing masks in an empty office, nobody around, literally bored to tears. And the fact that I was even there trying to do something, filling out a form, was such a source of amusement for them, because literally it was like there was nothing to do. And I was like, and I of course was brand new at this. I was filling out all my own paperwork, and I was like, hey, I could use some help. And mind you, this is an office that's normally like there's quite a bit of a wait for. So to have sort of free reign with a whole bunch of experts and ask lots of questions about what to do and how to fill things out correctly, and actually get kind of a bit of sympathy for our process.
They were so happy to see you too. They were like, let us help you get your license.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Give us something to do here.
We don't have anything else to do right now. So
yeah. No, so I mean, the obscure was the risk, but at no point have I ever felt that it wasn't worth the risk.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I get a shot for that.
You get a shot for that.
Oh, very good. What about you, Hope?
Yeah, you should have shot for that. Yeah. Oh, me. The biggest
Same question. Yeah.
Positioning myself as an expert on anything at all at any point in my life.
Fair.
Yes, and also the public speaking, really, because I in a town full of actors, I am not an actor. I have some college theater, but now somehow I wound up doing a public speaking gig 8 times a week, week in and week out. And somehow we've all survived.
No, you've thrived. You've gone beyond surviving. Very good. What is your greatest failure?
So many to choose from.
I know. Pick just
I mean,
one.
you've lived a good life, actually. I think that too. I don't know how I would answer these questions.
I have a very writery response to that, which I know my editor will hate me for. My editor and publisher, the unblameable Olivia Smith and Unnamed Press of Los Angeles, California, but not a complete failure. But I do feel like probably as most people who are creative producers, I felt a lot of failure around expressing what I wanted to in my first book, in my first foray. I use,
sure.
You look back, you read back, and you're like, oh, I would have done this better. I would have written, I would have changed this format. I would have done this around. Like, I don't know anybody that can read or look at their own work without that internal editing pen. But and I don't think it ever goes away. My greatest success and my greatest failure.
Oh, very good.
Mine's much more clearly a failure. I bought property in 2008 before the crash.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that.
No, that's a full stop fail.
Well, you rebounded at least. So you guys know the area. So I grew up in LA County, technically, but on the other side of the San Gabriel Mountains at a little town called Palmdale. So I remember 2008 where people like on my block are selling their houses for like near $1 million. And they're like, we're in Palmdale. What's happening? Like the world has gone mad. Like you knew there was a bubble once that was happening in the Antelope Valley, and God love it. But my professor, I mentioned earlier, Charles Hood is the gentleman's name. He has a line in one of his books that he describes it as the place where old sofas crawl to the end of the road to die. And I was like, that's no one's ever going to describe Palmdale any better. Like you nailed it, you know. And I love the place. He loves it. He still lives there. But I'm like, that's it. And houses were going for $1 million in 2008. So stuff happens, you know. Awesome. So where are we at? Oh, favorite bar not named the Obscure.
I know everybody at my favorites, and I don't like picking favorites because they might think that Brett's French. But
well, you can give two.
I'm going to go the safe path.
Answers.
I'm going to go the safe path. The Varnish. I learned to love a daiquiri at the Varnish, and it's closed now.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
That's also a cop-out answer because I know nobody's going to hate me because it's closed.
Good. What about you, Hope?
The place I learned how to make a daiquiri, Mess Hall Kitchen in Los Feliz, California.
Oh, very good. Los Feliz. Thank you for that. Have you ever witnessed anything inexplicable?
Like today?
Anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all bars are haunted. All bars are haunted. They're haunted by by breakups, by regulars, by live persons living and dead. So yes.
Good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I have a running list of I keep it in my phone. It's literally just called serendipity. So every time something happens that just feels too aligned to make sense, I make a note. And it's really fun because when I go back, and it's for years I've been compiling this, it's almost like building yourself a list of proof that the universe is rooting for you.
Sure.
And like just like I jokingly sort of said, there's so many failures to choose from. You know, if I kept a list of failures, that wouldn't feel very good to reflect on. But I do have. There are so many instances, the chestnut included, right? So random, so serendipitous. That happens so frequently, and I do make a note to myself every time it does, so that I have that kind of to look back on. And when I do, and it's like it's really hard to describe. It's really hard to explain. It's like, hey, that feels like way too random a set of circumstances to combine to what is the present moment. But here we are. And so I love that.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you for that. It is kind of funny when you look at it. You're just like, well, how did any of this like ever happen, right? And there's that saying with stories, right? Like truth is stranger than fiction. And people say that, and I'm like, that's because truth doesn't have to be plausible to anything. Like it just happens, so no one's going to doubt that it can't happen, right? In fiction, you do all that, and you're like, really? He just met Hope, and her dad happened to do this. This is so unbelievable, And I was like, well, but that happens in real life. But you try to do that in fiction, you're like, yeah, no, you don't get the same gift.
In a workshop, it would be verisimilitude. I couldn't say it then. I can't say it now. What is the word?
Verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude.
Yeah.
That one.
That word.
Just a track.
Ask ChatGPT.
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you for that. And then last one for a shots portion here. Favorite podcast, and why is it Writers Drinking Whiskey?
Well, Writers Drinking Whiskey. My dog Nugget recommended it as a can't miss. for your writing and whiskey needs. Yes.
Yeah. I'm kidding. So I actually say that because it's a joke, but then also it's a chance for you guys to plug any other podcasts you might like, and I'll link them here. So if there is podcasts you like, you can give them love. Here it's fine.
I would actually love to do that. Something that keeps all of our bar prep hours lively is my plethora of fun facts, etymological fun facts from the History of English podcast by Kevin Straub, I think is his name. But thank you. I will support your Patreon as long as you live. It has given me so many moments to tell everybody where their favorite words came from while we are making them.
My favorite podcast is Writers Drinking Whiskey Cliz, and I've got a little bit of a teaser for you here. The bottles you keep on your back bar. You've actually had more than just the obscure up there of things that I've made, and I'll let you go back through your own history of back bar bottles. But you keep a good collection, and I've been on your back bar longer than you realize.
Really? Okay. So let me try to figure it out, but I'm going to email you at some point to try to see if I get it right. You let me know if I nailed it. So awesome. Thanks for that. So thanks both for that. So I'm thinking now would be a great time to transition over to movers and shakers. It's women making waves and spirits, beer and wine. So I wanted to start with a specific person. Namely the writer of that. So I know it's women, but let's talk about woman that wrote the book. And we touched on this a little earlier when we were talking academia, and you mentioned you got your MFA, but I did notice on your website, I think you had, and I probably paraphrase this, so feel free to correct the quote, but I think it was something like you don't recommend it unless there's no debt and lost time involved as academia's pyramid scheme. So I wonder we kind of start with the academia portion. Maybe you wouldn't even stick with that because it's out of date, but maybe we start from there and we'll move on.
I mean, no sour grapes at all in that, obviously. But I do think, there is, and I will preface this by saying that I went to school with many very talented people who made amazing careers and are continuing to make amazing work and teach and inspire generations of writers and non-writers. But I do feel like there is a bit, and not across the board, but does seem to be a bit of a factory element in many programs, and that just people going into them should be aware and have your goals in mind, and maybe not just drop 80 grand on something just because you want to take 2 years off to write your novel. They don't take 2 years off, just write it, when you can. But I did go through it, and I did have a very interesting experience. I met many amazing people, and I showed up hungover to lectures by many, many amazing writers.
Sure.
Maybe would have rethought that.
Sure.
Yes. But
that's the genuine college experience. I think you nailed it. I don't think you would rethink that.
Really better done as an adult. And the genuine college experience, I was 30, William. I was 31 years old. But working in bars, which is really hard to not do that. But regardless, I have a lovely relationship, and I'm sure that will evolve. But I think that when I started out, I thought I was going to be a professor. I had this dream that I was going to be, inspiring students. And then I, maybe just discovered it probably wasn't the best path for me. I also was extremely eager. And if I had any advice for anyone going into an MFA program or an advanced degree program in the arts, it's to be yourself, and not the self that has the extreme level of anxiety of having to make every moment worth it. Because that damages your art. It's like, don't be, Tracy Flick in this scenario. You don't have to be the president of everything. You don't have to impress everyone. You just have to do what you came to do well. So that was my takeaway, is that I was very much Tracy Flick in that scenario and did not do a great job at it. But the good thing about that is that I during that time when I was realizing I was accruing a massive amount of debt in graduate school, I decided to take up bartending again as a means of supporting myself. And this was in New York City at the time. And New York in the 2000s was a great place to work in bars. So I drank a lot of pickle juice. I made a lot of the first cocktail I ever invented was the piccolata. Thank you, Nita bar in Williamsburg, New York. I said, what if we took the pickle juice and put it in the beer? And it was just serendipity.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, no, it was. I still think it was good, but yeah. So that is effectively and that is also there's something I have written about since is sort of finding my way from academia to the bar industry and then back into writing through that. Yeah, it's kind of a circuitous path.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Also, I wondered about the book specifically here. Who was like the most badass person you learned of in the course of researching that?
I mean, the one I was the most anxious. There were two that I was the most sort of excited to talk to. The first one was Joy Spence, who is the master blender of Appleton Distillery or Appleton Estate in Jamaica, and she was the first woman master blender in the world, 1997. Of any major distillery, and her story was fantastic. She started out. She was like, "Oh, I was really good at science, so of course my family wanted me to be a doctor, but I found out my first week at med school that I would pass out at the sight of blood, so I went to chemistry instead." And then she became this legendary like master of rum blending, and that was fantastic. I paid something like $80 for an international phone call because I was too nervous to ask her to meet me on WhatsApp. And which is also advice when you're writing a book. Don't just ask them to meet you on WhatsApp. And
it's life advice. Just ask people things. Everyone always gets so like, I always go, that's when we were joking, I think before the show, that I'm always like, we go places. My wife's so used to me like finding someone interesting and going, hey, you want to come on my show? Sometimes I get lucky and I get two guests, I get the double shot like I was joking before the show, and it like works out great. Sometimes you get rejected, but you never get the date if you never ask, right? So
yeah, it turns out rejection's not as bad as we think it is ahead of time. And and the other, I think, most interesting, fascinating stories were the Pink Boots Society women, who were these sort of, oh my gosh, and because I'm Terry, I'm gonna look up her name real quick because it's eluding me.
The
founder of the Pink Boots Society was a craft brewer in the early aughts, early days. I know the craft brewing movement started in the 80s, but really, kind of picked up speed and became nationwide in the 2000s, 90s and 2000s. And I just want to make sure that I don't mess up her name because
go ahead.
There she is. Terry Farendorf of the Pink Boots Society. This one right here. She is someone who couldn't find any other women brewers in the craft beer area, and so just took a nationwide road trip to find all of them. And met all of them and started a blog on the way and like stayed in a trailer, pulled a little camping trailer behind her van and just made her way around the country, just finding all of the, and this was, it was definitely like pre-Facebook, pre-social media, just trying to, she's like, I know there are more of us. Where are they?
Yeah. That is a badass way to do it. So yeah. That's really neat, especially when, people are awesome. Like, we're also awful, but then there's those moments where you just realize like, man, we do like some really like just crazy, quirky things. And you're like, oh, who goes and does that? Somebody will go and do that at some point, right? They go do it, and God bless them for it. So Was there any stories when you were researching it that you found like particularly? I mean, that is probably covered inspired. Was there anything you found like? Was there any horrifying stories that you found in the course of that?
I mean, there were sort of some stories that were just like of good intentions gone wrong. I remember this from the Black Star Brewing Company, which I don't believe exists anymore, but of the story of an African American owned brewery in rural North Carolina that had gotten some friction from the town around it, but didn't really feel the impact of it until like Vice magazine came and did a big story on it, and then like things really. So it's sort of like, oh, it's horrifying in that you were having some problems, and then someone used it on to further their own plan. Someone used it as clickbait and made it into that was kind of devastating. And then but I mean there were so many and I will say like writing this book and interviewing it's a collection of interviews, and it's part part essays and part business advice, and just it's a collection of interviews and advice from women all across the industry. And it actually sort of laid the groundwork for me to be able to do things like I had a cute cocktail company called Brevet, and I don't think I would have been able to take that risk if I hadn't talked to all these people that were just like, oh yeah, I was a biochemist and then I decided to make rum, or I was a marketer, and then I just was it Allison Park, who was a ballerina, a retired ballerina, who was like, I want to make whiskey and aged in cognac barrels, and just do it. Just do it.
Correct. Just do it. Yeah.
So I think that was my main takeaway from the research process was thinking, oh, well, I can find a company.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Awesome. Thank you. That's perfect. Actually, I was going to ask you like how you felt like you grew, from it. Because I always think like when you do those, interviewing's kind of funny. Like, so, speaking of that, right? I start the show. I have no interviewing history, like before the show, like whatsoever, right? I joke, my wife knows this all too well, that I say I was an actor, and I think actors are supposed to do this. I don't know if that's still like a thing, but that's my thing. I also say I'm a dancer, and she disagrees with both of those, but
a dancer.
Dancer. But I think that's
John Lovitz. Sorry, John Lovitz in SNL in the 80s. Every time.
Oh.
Acting.
Exactly. But that's kind of the thing, right? Sometimes you realize like, oh, people that host a show, they start hosting a show, they start doing something, right? So there's always a reason you can kind of point out that you can't do something. But everyone starts from nothing, and then you kind of grow from there. So and that's the fun. The fun is on the growth. I think once you kind of hit the peak, it's fun for a bit, but then it's also kind of like, well, what's next? Or do you grow from here? So that's lovely. What's next? So, and I don't know that you have a great answer, because just judging from the conversation here, I don't know that you have an answer, I should say. I don't want to put any judgment on it, but what's next for you as a writer? Is there more on the line? Are you writing again? Are you, where are you at with that?
It depends on what day you ask me, and I'm sure that's
Okay.
But no, I have consistently, wanted to plunge back in. There's so much out there about, deep interest in sustainability in spirits, and what does that mean? Or even like the character of bars and restaurants. There's a lot to be said about a lot of these things, and but I do feel like right now, it's sort of like the knowledge feels safe that if that's something that has to happen, that it will happen.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That if I wake up one day and say, this is what I have to do, I will do it. But for now, I wake up every day and go, oh my God, I have to do inventory. And that's what I have to do. But
Yeah.
yeah, there will be time.
Oh, absolutely. And you'll make the time, when you need to do it. So there's the human need of it, right? Like I need to go, do this thing. You will make time and make that thing happen. So absolutely.
Unless anyone wants to give me a great big grant to retire and just do that, then please give me a call. But
yeah. We'll put out the APB. Do people still say APB? I don't know that anyone young knows what an APB is at this point.
What's the acronym mean?
All Points Bulletin.
Oh.
Right?
I think you're right. I wouldn't have remembered that at all. But once you said it, I was like, oh, that is what that means.
I love a good TLA.
Yeah.
3-letter acronym.
Very good. Yeah, I know. You always need acronyms. Very good. Awesome. So did you have something you can read for us today?
We can do this. I was a little hesitant because, it's been a minute, but I do have an essay that I published on the website LitHub a little while back that I feel like is pertinent. And if it's not pertinent, cut it out. I won't be offended. All right. But this one, I wasn't crazy about the title that was assigned to me. My title of the essay was drinking brought me to writing and writing brought me to drink, or the other way around. One of those.
Correct. Yes.
All right.
Correct.
And it is. There are some sensitive subjects, and but I feel like the best thing we can do with sensitive subjects is just talk about them. So
absolutely.
Here we go. All right. I was born, if not an addict, then a facsimile of one. It gets intense. Every year as a child, I tried to give up chocolate for Lent for the same reason, with the same result. Sitting at a cafeteria table, glowering at my plain milk, irritable and snapping in a way I wouldn't recognize until I discovered nicotine withdrawal 20 years later. For as long as I could remember, I'd required daily doses of sugar, cacao, and caffeine. I credit being consistently broke and awkward through my young adulthood for keeping me away from harder drugs, which are expensive and take some finesse to acquire. But my relationship with alcohol has been intermittently fine, dysfunctional, and occasionally abusive. My family talks about the alcoholism gene with a half-ironic dread. Both sides of the family have stories. The grandmother smuggling gin in a perfume bottle. The uncle who used to drive himself home and crawl up the stairs. Stories of epic blacked-out shenanigans from cousins and siblings were so normalized in my childhood that they seemed like common rites of passage. But we were right to be wary. But too simple in our fears. We talked about the gene as an all-or-nothing prospect. The unlucky ones had addictive brains like bear traps, once triggered, near impossible to shake off or control. In digging around some World Health Organization and National Institute of Health reports, I learned that the gene is in fact multiple genes, and certain variations of which affect one's susceptibility to, quote, toxic psychoactive dependence producing properties of alcohol. One report notes that having alcoholism in one's family can negatively affect the family situation during childhood, raising a chance of trauma and future addiction. Meaning, yes, many addicts are born addicts, but problem drinkers are also made by circumstance. Many of us exist somewhere in the middle, however, not physically dependent, yet not exactly what a reasonable person would consider moderate. We in-betweeners, the heavy users, the bingers, the everyday drinkers, are frequently the children and grandchildren of alcoholics, and we walk the dotted line between craving and revulsion when it comes to booze. I can only speak from my own experience, but I believe those of us on the edge of trouble can make a break for a healthier relationship with the substance. I've been on the catastrophe train myself and changed direction at least. Changed direction with the least likely of allies, the alcohol culture itself. I've always loved bars. Not just drinking, but having a place to go where I can socialize or ski and my dog is hearing. Or read publicly for a small price of 1 beer an hour. Ray Oldenburg's Great Good Place, right? But as a problem drinker, my relationship with the public house was not always rosy. At 22, I met a man in a local pub who would save and then ruin my life. At 26, I was in a sizable debt and miserable with office life and attempted to douse my discontent with gallons of beer and whiskey. The constant low-grade hangover of my late 20s provided the challenge and sense of accomplishment in daily life that my jobs did not provide. Life isn't pleasant when getting out of bed feels like summiting K2, but it isn't boring. By 29, I was out of debt, but realized I might as well drink myself to death by blowing off steam. Did I quit going to bars? Of course not. I quit my job. I left a burgeoning career in fundraising to pursue a writing degree. In that transition, I found steady employment with a new family behind the bar. This was a privilege, of course, as I was childless and my parents set for their own retirement, and I was grateful for it. From my first shift, I was hooked. Not just on the unlimited access to beer on tap. Finally, I had a job where I could run around, where every day brought a different face, where conversations started and ended and disappeared into the night like cigarette ash. I still drank too much, but so did everyone around me, and it felt less like a problem. Well, anxiety and imposter syndrome stalked me at school. I found relief in the bar crowd. For the first time in my professional life, I felt competent. I felt loved. I loved hospitality, and I still do. Eventually, I finished school. I left academia, left my Brooklyn bar, and followed some guy to LA. Life was in flux, and a pattern emerged. Drink because of boredom, drink because of anxiety, drink because of convenience. Drink to blot out the suspicion that your relationship isn't working. Drink to forget your student loan debt. Wake up, attribute all your existential woes to the serotonin deficit of hangover. Drink to feel better. Repeat. Do not think about the short story collection languishing on your hard drive in that folder still labeled thesis. Don't think about how long it's been since I read anything that wasn't BuzzFeed. Don't think about the debt. Please, please don't think about the debt. I will always contend that hangovers, like breakups, get more difficult with age. If not physically, then existentially. Kingsley Amis, the godfather of modern cocktail rating, goes off at length with his essay about the metaphysical hangover. You wake up with a headache, but what really ruins your day is the shame. That sense that even if you spent the entire previous night drinking alone, talking to no one, sending no mortifying text messages, doing no harm whatsoever, you are still filled with the shame and the suspicion that you will never get anywhere in life. This became the theme of my post-MFA period. Appropriately, the day after my self-thrown graduation party at the bar where I worked was the most excruciating brunch shift ever experienced by man or beast. Growing up and getting one shift together had become a game of musical chairs, and I was dancing by myself in the corner, unaware of the silence. At no time was this as obvious as the months leading up to my best friend's wedding. Having spent the money to fly 3,000 miles for pre-wedding festivities, I spent day 2 of the bachelorette weekend prostrate on the sofa of our Airbnb, having somehow consumed way too much of the Jerry Thomas-inspired Pisco punch I'd made for the group the night before. A few weeks later, I spent the entirety of the bridal shower running back and forth to the bathroom in a fancy Staten Island Chinese restaurant, still sick on the previous evening's libations. The bride tactfully ignored me, but I could read through the thought pulsing behind my friend's annoyed glances. I wasn't in control anymore. And I wasn't. That was clear. I didn't have to drink to function, and I rarely drank during the day, but that threshold between going home and having a bender came closer and closer to the beginning of each night. I began to feel awkward around teetotalers. I feared them as I feared vegans. I'm imagining them lying in wait to pass judgment on my gin-guzzling, meat-eating ass. Secretly, I envied them. How much more would I have accomplished if I had not spent a quarter of my adult life incapacitated? A change took place after the move to California, but slowly. I had a terminal rating degree, but no appetite for adjunct professorhood. Having found the end of the MFA rainbow was populated by thousands of talented kids scrabbling for the same inadequate pot of employment gold. I'd been working a serving position at a craft cocktail place to pay the rent. and I was in awe of that bar. Scores of liquor bottles I'd never seen crowded the shelves. The bartenders meticulously measured out each and every ingredient into their metal tins, added thick blocks of ice, and whoosh, they shook, they poured, they garnished each drink like they were making it for their mother on her birthday. After a year-long stint of waiting tables, I went through 8 weeks of daily training to become a different kind of bartender. This was a whole new school of drink mixing than I'd known back in Brooklyn, descended from contemporary legends like Sasha Petrasky and Dale DeGroff, names I would come to learn along with the long and dramatic history of the cocktail. I became privy to an American culinary culture established in the 19th century, destroyed by prohibition and slandered by the sickly sweet club drinks of the 80s and 90s. A novel breed of bar had come into prominence, one that frequently took itself too seriously, but that focused on libations in which flavor reigned above intoxication. For 2 months, I memorized drink recipes dating back to the 1860s, then tasted and took notes on 6 to 10 different liquors a day before getting behind the bar to do speed trials. While I was memorizing the specs and the names of mezcal-producing regions of the Mexican states, the academic fire returned. The more I learned and tasted, the clearer it became that not every drink was worth a hangover. Knowing how each spirit and beer is made, the work that went into the bottle, it gave me a new respect for my addictive pal, ethanol. Respect is the antidote to abuse, whether it's directed at yourself or a potential abusee. I joined a fellowship of serious practitioners whom big drinking Friday nights were known as amateur hour, and the professional drinkers. They were the professional drinkers. I still managed to find an occasion to imbibe frequently, a family meal, shot at each shift, a visit to a friend's bar, a busy Tuesday. But I no longer partook to blot out my daily life. It was part of my daily life, and I wanted to remember everything I tasted. Another year passed, hangovers became fewer. I accrued a library of cocktail books from the millennium's bright new bar stars. I met a woman who wrote about wine and liquor for a cool online outlet. I told her I wanted a job. She said, so do it. In order to write, you have to observe, perceive, and reflect. My first attempts at wine and beer reviews were disastrous. Notes became scrawls. Tasting reflections turned into bad poetry. I stand by the bad poetry, actually. I slowed down. I spat out more. I pitched stories about the latest trends in whiskey, obscure alpine liqueurs, the wines of Mexico. I talked to spirits experts and celebrity bartenders and distillers and commiserated about the things that we loved. I spent the greater part of the past year working on a book. This was 2017, talking to brewers, distillers, winemakers, bartenders, brand owners, distributors, even people in the packaging industry, all of whom happen to be women. And among a great number of other things, I learned something invaluable. The ones in it for the long haul don't overdo it. The nature of their work demands careful self-monitoring. One gin enthusiast from St. Louis gave me one simple admonition: taste, don't drink. She loved a cocktail, but to sip, to appreciate, and to give away. She enjoyed the spirits her career was built on, but for the flavor and feeling of them, just a hint of a buzz, and few, if any, lost days. All this time, I'd been ordering cocktail after cocktail, trying to figure out all the wines I could afford, downing full glasses because I wanted to try everything. It dawned on me that there is plenty of booze in the world and plenty of time to taste it. I worked with it every day. No need to have it all at once, and no shame at leaving a half drink on the table.
Thank you so much for that. That was lovely. And I think for my money's worth, you are an actor. I think you nailed that very well. Yes. Exactly. Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And thank both of you so much for coming on. It was a real honor and pleasure to spend some time with you. I like to say with every show, it's last call. You don't have to go, but you'll have to restart the video. Is there any, for the audience out there, any one piece of advice you would bestow upon them just to make their day just a little bit better, or just their cocktail tasting experience just a little bit better? What would that be?
If you don't like it, get another one.
Amen. I know everyone always feels like you have to finish it. I used to do that too, but if it's too like, sometimes people add like a gallon of the simple syrup to it. So my thing with this probably goes back to why I like the like bag on flavored whiskeys. I just don't like too sweet. So if something like, and I feel like those flavored ones tend to come off like too sweet. But yeah, I get that completely, because sometimes they'll come and my wife will be like, just turn it back. And I'm like, oh, it's such a waste. I should just drink this like gallon of simple syrup here. But thank you for that.
Yeah.
Is there any other thing?
Oh, it's there's so many to pull from, but I think it's one of those things with this entire journey where there's so many opportunities for self-doubt. There's so many opportunities for pause. And I think the pandemic really did a number on all of us. And it's provided an opportunity to hit the reset button and re-examine what the other alternate timelines could look like. We sort of gotten a strange reset from, having to hit pause, having to sit quietly alone in many cases and actually think about how we got where we were. We all collectively got thrown off the treadmill, and with that came a new opportunity to say what if. And so if my piece of my reflection from that is, if you find yourself asking that question, you can just do it. But also that doesn't necessarily take into account that whenever you decide to do something, the people around you are going to have their own opinions and their own thoughts. And you know what? The universe is going to throw you curveballs, and it's going to make you feel like luck is working against you. So I would say do it anyway. Give luck a chance. There's a reason luck favors the bold, because it requires a certain amount of resilience. And if you can silence the voices on the outside, and you can silence your own voices on the inside that are, imposter syndrome, self-doubt, whatever those things are. If you can listen to the part that really wants to do something, despite what everybody says, do it anyway. And you'll figure the rest out along the way. So,
yeah. Amen. Thank you for that. That's perfect advice. Perfect advice for the show too. It's funny. I always ask that question at the end, and then sometimes I don't know who like any of us are to give advice, right? Like it's so easy like to have that imposter syndrome, right? Like who am I? Who's anyone to give advice? And then the flip side of that is we're all someone that can give advice, right? We're all people that have been through things, that have learned things. And so it's the flip side is like, okay, if you take the imposter off and just realize like, no, everyone's in that same boat. Everyone, you start, you want to start, you get into cocktails and you start thinking about distilling. You're square one. Everyone started square one at some point. So you have to push through, because I've done very well, with my writing and things, and I've been able to like transition to doing it full time. I still have those days where I'm like, what in the world am I doing? Why did I choose this story to write? Why am I spent all these years on that? And yeah, you have to push through the self. I think that everyone, I think it depends on who you are as a person. Some people, I think, maybe have a harder time with the actual real voices speaking to them. Other people, the inner voices. I think more of us, probably the inner voice is harder than the outer. But that might just be me projecting, because to me, the outer, I actually hear the world like Charlie Brown did, hear his teachers, right? It's like, la, la, la. I'm like, I don't know what's happening out there. But thank you so much. Thank you so much both for coming on. It was a real honor, thrilled to get to talk to both of you.
Likewise, we appreciate the time and all of the consideration for both coming to visit us here and to inviting us onto your program.
Extra shots thanks so much for the crew, Théron and Hope at the Obscure, for coming on and spend some time with us. For the audience here, question is, what is your favorite whiskey? I would love to hear it because I would love to drink it, clearly. So let us know down there in the comments section. We'd appreciate that. If you're someone watching on the YouTube box and you would like to have your Writers Drinking Whiskey on the go, we are available all your podcast formats. And if you're a podcast format listening to this and would like to see all of our beautiful faces, head over to the YouTube box. Last announcement, if you are into our open bar episodes of Writing, Drinking Whiskey, where we talk a lot more storycraft, writing craft, and things like that, we do, as a bonus for all of our Rumble members trying to build up the community there, have the episodes on there early. So we have them pretty much as soon as they're edited after airing. So if you'd like to go on, follow us there, you can. If you just want to keep it on YouTube, those shows will be on there, your normal monthly installment. Thanks again for tuning in. And cheers, everybody.